I'm just gonna pull up my phone, check if we're live. Send a notification that we're live now, or something like that. Okay. Let's give it a few minutes. Think we're live. Yeah, we are. Cool. On here. So, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Yeah.
Nice.
Holding up. It's
Uh-huh.
Thursday feels good.
Yeah. If you're on the StreamYards and we have people asking questions, you should see a channel that says comments on the right.
Cool. I see it.
And then if you need to message me anything, there's the private chat. And
Nice. So should I join the Twitch stream as well? Is that the best way to talk to people
then
or not bother?
I usually don't.
Okay.
Maybe if we're gonna send a link or something, we could do that. But other than
Okay.
that, I think we'll just wait for people to roll in.
Is there any way to see the attendance through StreamYard? Didn't look.
Yeah, top left.
Oh, maybe because my window's too small. Let me try this.
Okay, it just says live for how long, and then it says viewers, I believe.
Oh, okay.
A couple of people here so far, so we'll wait a bit. We have 8 students, so.
Nice.
Matt O'Donnell said, "What's up?" Nothing much.
Not too much today.
All right, we'll give it another minute or two, and then I think we are good to get started.
Cool.
Okay, I think we should get started. So, hi everyone. This is the week 3 live stream for the Slack apps Bitcamp, co-hosted with Slack. My name's Bo. I'm one of the student mentors that you probably know already. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Michael Brooks. I work at Slack. I work on Slack's developer relations team. Specifically, I work around open source tools. So I'm helping build the Bolt framework that we'll be showing off today. I also build some of the Slack SDKs and also work on some of the Slack tools. And the whole focus is just to make your life easier when it comes to building Slack apps.
Awesome. And you work with Alyssa and Ankur, right?
You got it. Yeah, direct teammates, Alyssa and Ankur. And then next week, you'll be meeting Steve as well.
Cool. Yeah, I think Fifi will be showing off GitHub's API and webhooks next week.
Yeah, should be fun.
So, before we get started with the content for week 3, does anyone have any questions on last week's modals, shortcuts, and also in general? You know, if people are still having trouble with the learning lab, they can't get ngrok up, things like that.
Especially on Windows, ngrok is tricky.
Yeah. It's like a .exe file, right? And you have to just yeah, it's weird.
And it seems like you have to run your server, so in this case, the Bolt app first,
Mm-hmm.
so that ngrok, when it starts, it can bind to that server. If you're using Ubuntu or Mac, it actually doesn't matter which order you start the server in ngrok. But
Yeah.
Windows, the order matters.
Uh, okay. Well, if people have questions, feel free to let us know while we introduce the new content.
Yeah.
So the first thing we're going to be talking about are event listeners. So you've used a few in the past. Basically, we use event listeners to trigger things. So in this case, week 1, you guys use I believe it was message event listener, and it was when someone said a specific phrase. You want to add anything to that, Michael?
Yeah, like event listeners can come in all flavors and sizes. Pretty much any API you use, you're going to be subscribing to events of some kind. For Slack, it might be a message coming in. Today, we're going to learn about a reaction, so an emoji being added to a certain message or even taken away from a message. But there's also events for when people join channels, leave channels, when users are created in the Slack team, even when your app is uninstalled, Slack can send you an event. The main advantage of an event listener is that you don't have to ask the Slack API what's happening. You can just sit back and subscribe to the information you care about, and it'll come to you when it happens, and then you can react to it.
Yeah. I don't think I've built a Slack app without an event listener.
Yeah.
Funny enough, they're super important. So like Michael said, this week we're introducing a new event listener. Actually, we're going to be introducing 2 things this week. The first one is an event listener called reaction underscore added. Um, in context of week 3, uh, you're going to be working with the Google Translate API later on in the homework. So we use this event listener um, to kind of mimic taking in a language input through an emoji. Um, so, for example, let's say you had a Japanese flag. That would be called, I believe, is it JP, Michael? Is it still JP?
Yeah, it's JP as an emoji. Yeah.
Yeah. So you would take in this emoji, save the actual, I guess, emoji ID for it, and then use that language code to translate the given phrase. So that's sort of the context we're using this new event listener in. Um, But in general, you can use it whenever someone adds a happy face to your message or something like that.
Mhm.
Do you want to talk a bit about threads and how we're gonna use them?
Yeah, threads are becoming more popular with pretty much any chat. And so Slack also has threads. So any message that appears in Slack, you can reply to it as a thread, which means it doesn't appear in the main chat stream. It appears as a sub chat that's branched off of that particular message. And so that's a thread. Anyone can create a thread as long as they're in the chat room. Bots can also respond inside of the thread. It's just a way to keep things organized. When it comes to writing the code, it's pretty much the same as posting a message to the channel, just like subtle differences saying that you want it embedded inside of the thread rather than in the main chat.
Mm. And we'll get into, I guess we're gonna get into talking about, how to pick which message you want to actually create a thread in, right? Or how to respond to that
Yeah,
thread.
we can kind of cover that in the code, but
Yeah.
the key thing for Slack is that every single message, it doesn't have a unique ID, which is usually what you would latch onto. Instead, it is all around the timestamp of the message. So every single message in Slack has a unique timestamp that's guaranteed. And that's the way you identify which message you want to create a thread in or
Mhm.
the response inside that thread.
Yeah. So, I guess we could get into the demonstration if you want to pull up, I guess, or just let me know when you want me to add your screen.
Sure. Yeah, you can share my screen now if you want.
Okay, add the stream. Cool.
Yeah.
So, what are we doing today, Michael?
Yeah, so I figured why not show you a demo first before you get into building it? Sometimes that just brings the context and makes it a little bit more clear. So what you're looking at right now is just one of my own hack Slack teams. I call it Michael's Sandbox here. And I've already created a small app. I called it the Translator app.
Mhm.
And I'm just going to DM this app. So the idea is that if people are talking away in just any kind of channel, they may be sending these kind of messages, and you may choose to react on that message. And that's fine. Everybody's just chatting. But if we happen to want to have that message translated, today we're going to allow the ability for you to actually add the emoji of a flag. And when you add that emoji, then it's actually going to respond as a threaded response to your original message. And inside there, the bot will just say translation for Japanese, and then imagine that this is written in Japanese. And so so it's like we're kind of covering just the basics here. You can see the general workflow is that the reaction added event, when I added this reaction, was sent to the server, and the bot, the Bolt framework, got that. It figured out that it was the Japanese language that needed to be translated, and then we would do the translation and then reply as a threaded response inside of here. The challenge for the students is, and this is the hard part really, is you want to use the Google Translate API to transform hello into Japanese, or ideally to support any other kind of flag you might want. So we might want French, or we might want to do even Spanish or something like that with Mexico.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I guess Michael sort of covered it, but basically this live stream, we're going to be introducing sort of the basics. We're not actually going to be introducing the API just yet, and we're really adding in I guess, the logic around the API. And then for the homework, we're going to be adding in that API. So, yeah, we're going to introduce reactions, reaction underscore added, and then also how to get your bot to respond in a thread today.
yeah, sounds great. Well, I
So,
can get into it.
yeah, let's do it.
But yeah, if anyone has any questions, just shoot them into the chat and we can address them. I'll keep an eye on the chat, and Bo is there as well
Hmm.
to keep
Will
an
do.
eye. So I'm just going to create a new channel here before we get too into it. Uh, Project week 3, so we can actually do some of the work inside of this channel. And yeah, we're not going to add
Hmm.
anyone. Cool. So we debated whether to start with an existing project or start from scratch. And we figured we would just like build this thing from scratch so that everyone can kind of follow along and feel like they're caught up from any previous weeks. If my text isn't big enough, just shoot a message into a chat and I can crank it up here. So right now there's no projects here. So let's create one called Slack Week 3 and move in there and kind of set things up. So myself, I pretty much live inside of Git. Everything I do is kind of kept track of with Git. So I'm just going to track everything here with Git as well. And the first thing we want to do is just create an npm package. This is a node project and it's going to manage all of our dependencies. So project is week 3, version 1's good, that's good. Entry point, you could do index.js. We typically have the convention of app.js. Results looks fantastic. And so we've got this like package JSON, which is great. I'm also going to just touch a few other files.
What does touch do?
Oh, it's interesting. So touch is a command that's more around the Unix world. And the idea is that you touch a file. And if the file doesn't exist, it's just going to create an empty file under that name. If the file does exist, it's just going to update the last modified or last seen, I guess, timestamp. And so you could touch a file just to kind of like show the timestamp's been moved forward. So it's a really quick way sometimes just to create a bunch of files.
So you're actually creating these files in the Slack-week3 repository, right?
Yeah, and so if we list them, we can see they're right here. And this is a good time just to jump into the code editor, so we're not spending too much time in the command line.
So we went over this in week 1 of how to start a node project with Node.js. But if people are still confused about that, let us know.
Yeah, I'll try not to spend too much time here, but we're happy to kind of jump in on anything that people want. So just some final setup that I'm going to do personally here is in the git ignore. I just want to ignore a few files that are common for npm. And so
so this means when you actually commit or push the origin, I believe is the word, to a GitHub repo, it's not gonna send these files, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so what we can actually do is, if I remove this one here, we can see right now env is bright green. And if I bring up my terminal, I just do a git status, we can see env is here. Now, we've learned env is that .environment file, and it's going to store all your secrets. So it's not something you want to end up in your Git repository. People could steal it. If you add it to the .gignore, it makes it gray there. And then if I end up doing git status, Git is now completely ignoring it. It's no longer shown there. So node modules is a nice one. Package lock is kind of like debated, but just to keep things clean for us, we can ignore that one. Well, and so like that's a pretty good start. I'm just going to add these files and commit them for the first time. And that way we can kind of keep track of what we change and how things move along. So I'm just going to set up the basic file here. And I'm not going to spend any time on this. Just because I write so many of these, I just have a template kind of saved.
Yeah.
So right
template,
there.
you have a Visual Studio Code template, or is it?
Oh, so this is a Mac specific thing. But
that makes sense.
Yeah, so I just use Alfred, and you can kind of save like snippets of different stuff that you might find useful. So it just kind of keeps it going fast. But you could totally create a Visual Studio template. That would be a great idea.
Do they? I think an extension, right? A VS Code extension for that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, and our team, since our goal is really just to make everyone's lives easier, we're looking into ways of making it easier for you to create your first blank app, or even create apps based on templates that already exist. So maybe a voting app that you want to extend or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now that we got this, we just need to install our dependencies, and we've covered this in previous classes too. I'm gonna make my font. No, I'm not gonna make it bigger. This is about as big as I think.
I think it looks great.
Cool.
Can everyone chat see it fine?
Probably.
Yeah, I think it looks fine. Yeah.
So I'm just gonna install the Bolt framework. We're using version 3 with Bolt. And I'm also going to install the dot environment files. So you can see it's created this package lock file, and you can see it's green, which means I misspelled it. I added a plural there. So I'm going to update my git ignore, and we'll just properly ignore that sucker. So the last one, I'm not sure, Bo, have you guys learned about NodeMon at all?
I don't think we've introduced NodeMon now.
So it's your call, but I think it makes life a lot easier, especially for apps like Bolt. So NodeMon, it monitors your node process. And the idea is if the current workflow that all the students are doing is you start your server for Bolt, you test it, you make some code changes, you then have to stop the server and then start it again. And everyone's been burned in the past where they forgot to restart the server and then they couldn't figure out why their code isn't working. NodeMon just simply, every time there's a file that changes, it restarts the node server. And so you can start your Bolt app and then just forget about it. So it's really, really nice to use. So I'm just going to install that, in this case, to my dev dependencies. So if we just open up the package JSON,
Cool.
I've installed the Bolt framework here, the dot environment, and then down in the dev dependencies, NodeMon. And just to kind of get NodeMon's magic going, I'm just going to tell it when we run the command npm start to run app.js using NodeMon rather than just node normally.
So that usually defaults to index.js, right? But when we set it up in the command line, we change that to app.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
just because of a Bolt convention, we tend to use app.js. If you prefer index.js, I prefer personally index.js. Go for it. Like the Bolt has no problem with that. It's not that opinionated. But I'm just using the same pattern that students would see in our documentation. Just makes life a little bit easier for sure.
Yeah, I think I've been using app.js now for Slack apps in general, but
cool.
They both work, yeah.
Yeah, so I think we have all of our dependencies installed. We can't start our Slack app yet just because we haven't set up an app. We don't have the token or the signing secret. So this is probably a good time to go and create an app here as well. So if we jump over to api.slack.com, go over to the apps, you can see here's my little translation app that we have. We're looking at Michael's sandbox. And so yeah, let's just create another one here and call it project 3. Maybe a little bit less dorky. There we go.
Cool.
Sweet. And then the other thing that the students will have already learned is that you need to now install this app into your workspace before you can really do anything, before you can even get your bot token. So in this case, we're going to jump down to that permissions and OAuth section, and we have to add some sort of scope before we can install the app. It's just a convention of Slack. I believe everyone's kind of covered scopes, but is there anything you want to add to it, Bo?
So I believe week 1 we just did read and write, but I suppose we need one more for this project because we have to keep track of reactions possibly.
Yeah, we can kind of take that one step at a time, but
Okay.
chat write is definitely like one that we need. So we might as well just add that now. That's a given. Just like you said with events, I can't imagine many Slack apps don't use chat.write.
And you can add these whenever you want, right? You don't have to
Yeah,
set them at the beginning.
the only thing is each time you add a new scope, which is a new permission for the bot, you do have to reinstall the app into your
That makes
workspace.
sense, yeah.
Yeah. And if you're building an app that other people would install themselves using OAuth,
Mhm.
then you actually get into a situation where you have to ask each of those users to reinstall it. So if you have thousands of users
Okay,
using your
yeah.
app, some might be installing it with certain scopes. Others might have not got around to updating it to the latest ones. Um, but for us, we're keeping it really simple here.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so I think at this point, did it save that permission? I feel like it should have been
I
telling
feel
me
like it
to.
didn't. Oh, it did.
Did. Okay, well, let's install it to our workspace here. Cool. So we got our bot token. Typically, you want to keep this stuff pretty secret, but we trust it on this, all right?
And we're using ENV, which I don't remember if Ankur and Fifi talked about.
Oh, really? Okay, let's
But
kind of cover that for a moment.
yeah.
So usually the students would have to put the bot token and the signing secret into their environment variables. And so that means you have to, if you're on the command line, you might be running, let me clear this for you. You might be running something like export, yada, yada, yada. And each time you start up a new session, your export is gone. You might then have to modify your bash profile or your sh profile to load it each time. And it's just troublesome, really. The environment file is part of the .env library. And what happens is you call this config immediately at the beginning of your app, and it'll read the contents of this file and load it into your environment. And that way you don't have to be changing stuff on your terminal. It's just saved in this file, and it's made a lot easier. So I'm going to set this file up right now for us. So again, I've got kind of like the template here. And so these are the two environment variables that we're going to load in from the .env file. Let's go again and grab the bot token
Hmm.
and throw it here. The nice part is, even though I haven't modified my actual true environment on my computer, when we run this app, this process.environment.slackbot token is now going to actually have the value that's loaded from this file.
So
So
we use process.env to actually call like this variable in the other file, right?
yeah, so process.env, the .env looks up all your environment variables on your computer. And
Hmm.
so whether you're Mac or Windows or Linux, you're going to have a whole bunch of environment variables. They even explain what your operating system is. And you can add your custom ones, and that's typically how you would define secrets, API tokens, and stuff like that. So this is just an easier approach when you're doing local development, is to load it from this environment file. Um, Going forward too, for the students with the Google API, they can certainly add their own Google API token into here as well.
Oh, yeah, that's a good thing to.
They have to do any of that for the translation
Hmm.
part of this exercise.
I believe the translator API makes you download a JSON file with a few tokens, and then you have to set it up through
You have to
there. But
save it somewhere. Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah,
Cool.
um, both options work. So.
Both options work. So I'm going to grab that signing secret now,
Mhm.
and everyone's going to see this secret. So if anyone's watching and they're like really keen to hack, you can look at these two values and probably start sending messages in my Slack channel. So, or I'll delete the app after the live stream. So I think
Okay.
we're kind of set up there. So at this point, if we just start our actual app, we'll see whether or not it's going to work. And so normally, a lot of the students may run node app.js, and that should work fine. So Bolt is up and running, everything is good. Throughout this exercise, we're just going to run npm start. And
I think we got a question chat by
cool.
Yantare. What was the thing used to access templates called again?
Yeah, and so this is just my own developer setup, not something that you have to do. If you're on a Mac, you can use a third-party program called Alfred. So Alfred 4 app.
Yeah.
And it's basically Spotlight on steroids for the most part. And a nice feature of that is that you can save snippets. You can recall your clipboard really easily. So if I do this, you can see I've kind of like, you can see my clipboard here, right? These are the two I've just copied, a couple others. And then that's
I
just like,
believe
it's
the
all there.
one for Windows is called Wox, WOX. Um, so if you don't have a Mac, that's an alternative.
Cool. At the end of, yeah, it looks
Yeah,
identical,
similar.
right? And so
Yeah.
these little things can be really helpful just to kind of do your day-to-day work and help you kind of remove some stuff from your mind, help you be a little bit more productive. So give it a shot. Yeah, and so this time around, I'm going to run npm start here. And it's doing the same thing. It's just starting the app. But if I happen to, say, change this file, you can see the Bolt app was actually shut down and then restarted automatically. And so no longer do I have to stop the server, start the server. It's just a really quick way for me to now forget about that one extra thing. Every single time I save the file, it's just going to restart that server for me. This works for a React app or any other app. It's not something specific to Bolt, but it's specific to Node. And it's really useful. So
Hmm.
we're just going to use that today.
And you can use it for many other things, right? It doesn't have to just be a Slack app. You can use it whenever you're running a Node server.
Yeah, anything, you could use it for really anything, but because it's written in Node, it's probably just popular for building actual Node apps.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But there'll be equivalents for Python or for Go or for any other programming language as well.
Hmm.
They're very popular, and they just, again, they're good for development. You wouldn't want it in your production, but sure as heck makes life a lot easier.
Hmm.
Cool. So this is kind of up and running. So I'm just going to commit these files, basic app.
We got another question
Yeah,
quickly.
cool.
Matt said, "Will that still function with ngrok on Windows because of the necessary order you mentioned earlier?"
Yeah, it's a good question. So it should work fine on Windows. Again, you'll want to run npm start first, just like this. And speaking of ngrok, we got to start up ngrok now as well. So why don't we just do that? So for me, I'm just going to open a new terminal inside of Visual Studio,
Hmm.
which means it's just a second little terminal here. You might have a different window in your computer. And I'm just going to boot up ngrok. We're using port 3000 right now, and I'm just going to use my own subdomain, which is mbrooks. And so you can see ngrok's up and running, and this guy's up and running. I've never had any conflicts personally, Matt. In Windows, we're seeing some issues with ngrok. So I would recommend starting your node process first, and then starting ngrok. And I don't think you should have any issues there.
Yeah.
Cool. So we've kind of got like that basic app going. There's nothing we can do with it. There's no way we can test it. But this is a good time to now start to think about actually building out that translation app. And that first thing that we wanted to do was react to kind of any kind of emoji that's happening here, that's going on. So I think we should try to take advantage of that and look into that right now.
Hmm.
For myself, when I'm trying to learn how to do something, I would think about like, what do I have to do directly? And in our case, we're writing code. We're writing code in Bolt. And so I would personally go over to Bolt's documentation. The easiest place is slack.dev/boltjs. So it's like slack.dev/boltjs. And inside of the documentation here, we've already kind of learned in the past about responding to messages. That was kind of covered in a previous live stream. And if we look down here, there's one here listening to events. And so This is the easiest way to kind of get started in terms of using Bolt and figuring this stuff out. This code sample looks pretty solid, so I'm just going to copy it back here and paste it.
Mm-hmm.
So, we don't care about when a user joins, but we do care about like when interaction is added. And we don't want this team joined. We want a different event. And let's kind of like learn how we can look that up.
Mm-hmm.
And inside of this code sample, it looks like there's actually, I'm just going to delete this comment, there's actually just a message being sent into a channel. And it looks like we're going to need the channel ID as well here. So,
And what's the best way to get the channel ID?
Yeah, so like we're going to just take this one step at a time. My goal would be, let's figure out what that event name is. It was reaction added, reaction something. So we'll try to find that. And once we can subscribe to that, then let's console log out this event object, because this event object is the payload that's coming in. It's going to tell us everything. And from there, we can figure out, does it have a channel ID? Can we use it? What other useful information is there that might kind of help us along? And so I'm just going to save that, go back here. Now, we can't really do much else with Bolt. It does say we can go over to any event. And so if we actually click this link, we're sent over to api.slack.com/events. And this is a list of every single event that you can subscribe to in Slack. And there's a lot. And some people might ask, like, why can't I subscribe to everything? And the main reason is that it's a lot of information coming at you. If you subscribe to everything, your little server may get pounded, especially if you're getting thousands of messages every second because of these events. So it's a lot better to only subscribe to what you need. The other side is that you have to ask for permission from the user to see this information as a bot. And it's a lot politer to ask for less. So just asking for the information you need, your users are probably more confident in installing your app, more confident that you're not spying on them or like using the wrong information at all. Now, because this list is so big, I'm just going to do a find here. And if we were shot down, we can kind of see there's 4 results. I'm going to make my screen a little bigger for you. There's 4 results here. Really, there's just 2. There's reaction added and reaction removed. And so pretty sure this is the one Bo showed in the presentation deck, reaction added. And so why don't we just steal that name right now? It's a type, and jump back over to code and just add the reaction added there, just so we have it. Now, before we can run our code and test it, we do have to make sure our bot can use this event. And so we're going to have to subscribe to this event name. And then we can also see there's a scope here. In order to use this event, you're required to have the permissions for reaction read. So we're going to want to make sure that we actually have access to that scope as well. Mm-hmm. So again, I'm going to copy that. And if we go back to our actual Slack app over here, this is really the beginning of this exercise. Everything we've done up until this point, we've covered in every other live stream. So going forward, it's going to be kind of new territory, but I think it's going to feel familiar to everyone. So the first thing we want to do is get down to this events section here. In the past, we've used permissions. This time we need to subscribe to an event. And the first thing that we're going to come up against is that we have to enable it. And once we enable it, we now actually need to provide a request URL. And so this is kind of that dreaded situation of dealing with ngrok and making sure that everything works. So yeah, let's jump back and just make sure that our server's running here. So it is. So when Slack actually sends a message to test whether or not we can respond to events, our server is going to be able to respond. And then we can see ngrok is still running. And so let's get our request URL set up here. For Bolt, it automatically generates a URL /slack/events. I'm pretty sure we covered that
Yeah.
with the
So I believe
interactivity
we talked.
section.
Yeah, we talked about how specifically with the Bolt framework, it's slash events, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. It's /slack/events. You can
Yeah.
customize that if you want, but that's kind of the default. And then for my own ngrok instance, this is my address. You guys will have a different subdomain attached. And there, let's just jump back and paste this URL in. Sorry, wrong one.
There we go.
So you can see it said verified. And what happened was if I jump back to ngrok, we can see that it actually hit us. So it hit us twice. The first one was because I mistyped it and there's no endpoint that responded. The second time, it actually hit the server. And we can also just jump over to Bolt and just make sure. You can see the first one, this unhandled request, is because I mistyped the URL. And then the second one would have been handled successfully.
Mhm.
And so I can feel pretty confident everything worked. It was verified here. If anyone starts to have issues, you can post stuff into the chat. This is always kind of the hardest part, is getting that wired up. And in the meantime, we're going to subscribe to that reaction event. So now that we're verified, we see the ability to kind of subscribe to different reactions. We also get this unfurl ability. So if I just go here, type in reaction, there's a reaction added. And the nice part is we don't even have to remember that scope that we were thinking about. It's automatically added there. So if I hit save, again, we kind of talked about how anytime we change our scopes, we have to reinstall our app. So it's going to want me to reinstall. And we can see this reaction read scope here. If you're curious, you can always go to your permissions section. And if you scroll down, you'll see that it was automatically added here. You know, a few minutes ago, we added that chat right. Now we have the reactions read.
Oh, that's nice. So whenever you add in that event listener, it adds in all
Yeah,
these scopes. Yeah.
yeah. So it just makes your life a little bit easier. That's auto added, and it's kind of nice to double check it too. Just going to go ahead and reinstall this app here. So with that app reinstalled, we can actually now, let's switch back to code and let's get rid of this big terminal. So we're already subscribing to this reaction added. And Bo kind of asked the question of like, how do we figure out this event payload? And there's a couple ways. So kind of the developer getting your hands dirty way would be to just console log that sucker out and take a look at what it's going to look like. The alternative would be if you jump over to the documentation, you can see this is what the payload is roughly going to look like. You're going to have this type, which is reaction added. And then a lot of it's explained down here, but the user, it looks like, indicates the user who performed this event. So that's the person who added the reaction to the message. You can see reactions, the actual name of the emoji, without the colons on each side. And then there's this item idea. And item is the item that had the reaction happen to it. So who wrote that message that had the reaction? And then this is a bit of detail about that particular message. So we can see this is what we care about, is this channel, and it's embedded inside this item. So in a bit, we're going to try to figure out how do we get our hands on that channel.
Yeah.
You know, we can take that one step at a time. So with our server, with our code written here, and with our server automatically restarting, we should be able to test this out and see how it looks. So there's two ways you can do this. You can create a channel and you can invite your bot to that channel. You have to put an @ sign at the beginning if you're going to do that to invite your bot. So mine is Bit project, and so at Bit project, and you can invite the bot into this channel. The alternative is you could actually click this little DM button here, and if you just type the name of your bot, it's going to open up a little conversation with your bot right here, and you can just have a DM directly with your bot. So either way works. Whichever one feels right to you during your development, yeah, just go for it. I'm going to jump over to this channel though. And so, hello, Bit project, your message. And at this point, nothing is going to happen. But if I say add the looking at emoji, let's see if we got a payload here. And so we did. And so back in our node process, we can see we have an event here, and we have this payload. And it's kind of what we expected. We really care a lot about just the reaction with the eyes. And then inside this item, there's this channel, and that's the other thing that we really care about the most. Makes sense to everyone on how we can get that? Seems like everyone's good.
I think that's a much better explanation than what I was thinking of doing.
Okay, cool. Well, like at this point, everyone has their own style to development, but I like to make sure that everything's wired up first, and feel pretty confident about that before I add complex logic that's going to make the code really bad, or difficult to read. So why don't we, when there's a reaction, why don't we send a message into Slack? And so we can just steal this code that we borrowed, and reuse it. And so the first thing we need is this channel ID. So if I just do like a const and pull out that channel event, that should give us like info about the event. So that should give us this channel right here. And I guess like if you're more into ES6, you could just write the channel like that. And then instead of welcome to the team, this user, let's say thanks for the reaction. Let's say the user's name.
And that bit's set up for you already, right?
Yeah, and so if you remember, we pulled this from the Bolt
Yeah.
sample documentation. So it's got event.user. So this is a special syntax here where you provide the user's ID and you wrap it in this @ sign and these brackets, and it's going to automatically display the name the way the user has it set up in Slack. So some people like to see the username, some people like to see the display name, the full name. This way Slack can always display it the way people want, and it means the developer doesn't have to think about looking up the person's name and including this message. Kind of troublesome. And let's just kind of like prefix these in case something good or bad happens. We kind of get a sense of like what's happening there. I think that's kind of everything. Client, we're copied and pasted this directly from Bolt, but client gives us access to, you can see web client, which is an SDK that's under the hood for Slack. And it allows you to access all the web APIs. So chat.post message is one of the web APIs. So we're just gonna, give this a shot and see what happens here.
Cool. Yeah.
Cool. So if I take these eyeballs off and re-add them, so now so we've kind of got a message just sent here. My preference is my username. I like seeing my username. If I had this set up to say my first name, it would have it there instead. So, that's step one, not half bad. This seems like a good place to figure out how the heck do we get this message to appear as a threaded response. So inside of this thread here. It's also kind of a chance to check in maybe with the chat and see.
Yeah, we got a question from Rebecca. So she said, this is kind of trivial, but when I try to console.log the event, I just get event object.
Event object. Yeah, and so that can happen sometimes. One way, Rebecca, if you're looking at my screen, is you can do json.stringify, put the event there, add a 0 and add a 2. And so I know it's ridiculous, right? So what it's saying is it's going to put two indentations and it's going to expand it out. So it's going to stringify it and make it look nice. You know, I can't say exactly why you're seeing object and I'm not, especially if you're just doing console log. Could be the differences between Windows and Mac if you happen to be using Windows. But yeah, I'll leave this up on my screen. As long as you can see that, maybe you can try using that stringify approach. The only downside is you won't get the pretty coloring in your terminal, but some terminals aren't set up to do that anyways, so it's not a big deal.
So object to object, yeah, I'm not sure why.
Yeah, yeah, it just seems to be having trouble expanding out the event object.
Yeah.
The other thing is, Rebecca, just make sure you're using the dereferencing here as well. So, or sorry, destructuring here. So make sure you have the curly braces and then event inside of the curly braces, and you're not writing it kind of like this. That's gonna bad result as well.
She said she's gonna try it, but her app just crashed.
As it happens. Cool. You'll see this again, and maybe somebody can paste that code in the chat for you as well.
I can write it out quickly.
Great. Yeah, and so if we kind of like continue here, we want this to be inside of that message. And so what I would do is, again, go back to our trusty API documentation. And really on this site, the bread and butter is inside this API's drop down here. And these two are probably the most valuable resources you'll have. So event types we already saw, that's that huge list of events here. The other one that's really useful is methods. And inside methods, if we just search for post message here, we have chat.postMessage. This is, of course, something we've already used in the past, but now we can kind of take a look at all these arguments and get a sense of like, what arguments in here that can give us the ability to post inside of a thread rather than just at the top level. You can do things like posting as a user rather than your bot, which can be useful sometimes. You guys learned about blocks the other day. If you have the right scopes, you can change your icon as a bot. And if you keep going down, we can attach text. And then we've come to this thread TS. I'm just going to copy. Can I copy that? There we go. I'm going to copy that so that we can use it in a bit. So thread TS, it provides another message as you provide another message as TS value to make this message a reply. And then just a little caveat of avoid using the replies TS message. So it's saying don't use a threaded.
Parents and
yes.
stuff. Okay.
Yeah. So TS here, like all that is it's saying timestamp. So TS equals timestamp. And kind of like in the slide deck at the beginning, we talked about how it's a little weird, but each message doesn't have a unique ID in Slack. Instead, the timestamp is the unique ID. And so where normally you might expect to use message.id, usually you would replace that with the idea of using message.ts,
Okay.
the timestamp. And so we want to pass in an argument called thread.ts, and we want to provide the timestamp of the message that we're reacting on. So in this case, it's this one, that I sent at 7:13 p.m. Pacific. We want this message as timestamp so that we can reply to it as a thread. That's kind of what we're gunning for here. So if we jump back to our code and go back to our terminal, my server again, I just did a git commit. So if we look at our event again, we have two timestamps. We have the events timestamp, and then inside this item, we have another timestamp. Now the timestamp that we want to use is the one inside the item, because the item in this case is the message that the reaction was on. The events timestamp is just when this event happened to be triggered, which we don't, events don't have any existence inside Slack in this case, so we would be reacting to nothing. So we're going to try to grab item TS in this case. We've already got item destructured here, so if we just add timestamp, should be golden, and then thread TS, and we just reference our timestamp here. And that should be getting pretty close to what we want to be able to respond inside of the message. So I'm going to test this out, and then maybe we can check chat to make sure that everyone else is, at least trying to follow along and feel like they're understanding it. So I'll remove the eyeballs from mine again and just use the same one. So yeah, this time we've got a reply here. Slack is also telling me I have a threaded response up here. And so thanks for the reaction, MW Brooks. So we got it. It's appeared inside here. So, we're one step closer. We're still reacting to everything, not just flags, but we're getting closer, which is pretty rad.
Yeah, so we have that new event listener set up, we have threads set up, and now we really just have to format it in a way that prepares it for, I guess, our little translation app.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to commit this so that we can go and make a bunch of mistakes and not lose copy. What's everyone else doing? I think
Yeah, how are people doing?
Sounds like Stringify is working if we haven't heard too much. All right, well, I'm going to continue along.
I think we're good to go on if nobody has questions. Once we finish the entire demonstration, we'll have like a 5-minute period for whole questions too. Oh,
Cool.
Rebecca said everything is working. Cool.
Nice. Good to hear, Rebecca. So, for me, when I think through this, the way I would approach this again is let's kind of cover out the steps that we want rather than just kind of coding and blazing and hoping it all works. So we have a way to get all the information out of the event. After that, we're going to have to somehow get the language info reaction. So, people are going to be adding, say, like flag MX as a reaction. And, we somehow want to infer that that's ES for Spanish, and probably that, the actual language name is Spanish. So we have to figure out how do we do that.
Yeah.
Once we've got that, we're going to probably get the text to translate. And so, what was the message? And if I flip back to Slack, in this case, we'd want to try to get hello bit project because we need that data, actual text. After that, we're going to translate the text. And then, what we're doing down here is sending the translation in Slack. And we kind of got our bases covered on this one.
So we have that logic set up already, sending the translation, the thread, right?
Yeah, so I think we're sending the translation to thread perfectly fine. So we're done there. So, we really just want to cover these other three sections here. So we can kind of get into it. So for the language one, I feel like this is a chunk of code that's going to could get more complex. And so it's a good time to put it into a function so that we want to think about that. So maybe we'll call it like get language from reaction. And we're going to have to probably pass in the actual reaction so that this function can figure it out. And we actually haven't done that yet. So why don't I just put that there, because that's kind of where we want to get to. But how do we get that reaction variable? So I'm going to pop over my terminal once again here. And if we go up to our last event information, which is right here, we can see right at the top level of this event is the reaction. It's called reaction, and in this case, I was adding the eyes. So it seems like it's pretty straightforward there. I think we can just safely destructure reaction out of it at the top level, and we'll get it. So the reaction there, and let's just jump to the bottom of our file to add this function, get language from reaction. So I'm down at the bottom of the file here. And just like before, I've already written this. I felt like it was something that I would end up just making a bunch of mistakes on while I was typing it in front of everyone. So I just decided to code it up ahead of time, put in my clipboard, and here it is. But we can just walk through it. This is probably the most simple, unflexible way to do it. And for the students doing this at home as homework, I know you're going to find better ways to do it. And maybe as a group, we can kind of think through a couple of ways that might work better.
Mm-hmm.
So add a code doc at the top here, and it'll be like the language info from the Slack reaction. And that reaction is a string, and it's going to return probably an object. So if we kind of dive into the details of this function, what I've chosen to do is create a map. And there's way too many languages in the world, so this map is definitely not covering them all. And so what I've done is I've taken Slack's emoji name, so FRMXJP, and then I've provided an object that describes that language in a way that could be useful to the Google Translate API. So here's the official language code for French. In Mexico, the official language code is ES for Spanish. In Japan, the official language code is JA for Japanese. And Google Translate's docs, I'm going to click this link here. It covers all of the languages with all of the codes. And so you can see if you chose to build this as a map, it's pretty tedious, honestly, to do it all, but you could. But that's kind of where I'm getting that information from. That's what this map is. For students, I would like, better ways might be some NPM library that, probably takes in an emoji and can somehow spit out these language codes. That'd be probably one better way. Another one might be Node's built-in international library. We might be able to use that to get some of this information. But we're going to do it the easy way, and hopefully the students find better ways to do it later. So what I've done is I've noticed something funny. I've noticed that some emojis have flag dash in front, so flag dash MX, while other emojis don't, so FR. And so why don't we take a look at that briefly here? Actually, I'm a little afraid to take a look at it right now. I think I might break our code, but we'll take a look at it in a moment. But because some of them have flag dash and others don't, we need to strip out that flag dash to use this in some meaningful way. And so the code that I have here is taking a reaction, which might have flag dash, might not, and we check if it's including the flag dash.
Yeah.
If it is, we split it on the dash, and if it's not, we just return the reaction itself.
That makes sense, yeah.
We just dump it into this destructured array. The first part we call prefix, which we never use, and the last part is the useful emoji code.
Emoji code, yeah.
Yeah, and then we just use that emoji code to look it up in this map up here, and it returns the object. And of course, if somebody like added the eyeballs emoji, it's not going to find it. And so, it's returning an object or it's going to return undefined. unsupported emoji.
Yeah.
So kind of how this function is going to work. Maybe these are the bones of something better that the students can work on. Yeah, so let's jump back up to where we use this function here. And I think we're missing one last piece here, which is if somebody does react with an emoji that's not a flag, we want to start ignoring those. And so, if language is not defined, if it's undefined, then let's just return. So we're going to do nothing if the emoji is not a flag that we support. Now we should get this language, and we can test this out by just adding a couple flags that we support and seeing if it responds, and seeing if it doesn't respond for the other emojis. So if I just jump back to Slack, let's take the eyeballs away. Actually, let's test with the flag first so we feel pretty good about ourselves. Yeah, so
Nice.
adding the Japan flag, we do get a message. If we add our trusty eyeballs, let's hope, yeah, we don't get a message.
So we don't get one, yeah.
So now we're at least only reacting to flags, which is kind of cool. And I didn't have to try to live code that function and probably mess it up, which is always nice too.
So now that we have the language we need to translate in, we have to actually get the user's text.
Yeah, so this is the last tricky part, is that we want to be able to get this text. Trying to find this without any guidance could be tricky, but we know that we need to make a request to Slack. And so if we go to Slack's documentation and we go back to our list of methods, methods are what we use to make requests to Slack. So we know somewhere in the super tiny scroll bar is the function that we want to use or the method that we want to use. In this case, it's not going to be under chat. Chat is solely focused on sending messages really into Slack and getting basic information back. But if we scroll down, there's this whole conversation section, and that's really focused around the content inside Slack. And you can do a lot of interesting things. The one that we care about is going to be conversations.history, which fetches a conversation's history of messages and other kinds of events. So if we just jump into that one, this is the method that we're going to want to use. And just like every other time, every time we want to use some new method or event inside Slack, we have to deal with all the scopes that it's going to want, because you're asking a lot of permission. In this case, we're going to ask the user for permission to read the channel's history. So any history, every message ever sent to a public channel, we're going to get access to. We're going to get access to the private channels, the DMs, that's what IM is DM messages, and MPIM, which is multi-person DM groups. And so we're going to want to add all of these scopes to our app. And now is as good of a time to do that as any. So if we just jump back again to our Slack app here, we're already on the OAuth and permissions section. So we can just go down to scopes and type in history, and we can see the 4 right here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And just like every other time, because we're adding new permission to our app, we're going to have to reinstall this sucker. So hit the reinstall. And now our app is imbued with more power, more abilities. So if we go back to this API, there's so many arguments that it supports. And this kind of gives you a sense of what the response is going to look like here. It's really just going to have a messages object, which is an array. And then inside of there, it's going to have each message. Because you can actually request a range of messages. You could say, give me every message for this year. or give me the last 10 messages. So it's quite a powerful API, but we're going to use it in a relatively simple way. Now, the nice part is we've been slowly kind of making an effort to make people's lives easier. And so we've been adding this code tab here to a lot of our documentation. And it gives you a chunk of code of how to use this. And we don't want to use Python today. We want to use JavaScript. And that's basically what we want right here. So why don't we just grab that to start with and just jump back here. So get the text to translate. So in this case, we're not going to call it that. We're going to call it something. Actually, let's not get there yet. Let's just stick it up here. So first thing I just want to make sure is like we've already used result down here. So let's name this one something a little different. Call it history result. So it's an asynchronous function. We're going to call client.conversations.history. We know our channel is actually that, or in this case, we can just remove it. We already have it up here. So let's take a look at what other information we need though, because we have to say which exact message we want. And we've kind of learned timestamp is what we're going for here. So we're kind of looking right here at the pieces that we want to deal with. The first is because we're allowed to fetch a range, we want to say the latest message is going to be the timestamp of the message we care about. And then we're also going to say the oldest message is the timestamp that we care about. So we're going to restrict our range down to just that one message. We'll want it to be inclusive so that we include just the one message that we're getting. And just to make sure that we don't get any extras, we'll probably set the limit also. So it's a big chunk of code here. And it's only confusing because it's a pretty powerful little function, really. So oldest is going to be that timestamp. Latest is going to be that timestamp. You can see my code editor actually autocompletes a lot of this stuff for me just because it's pulling it from the type definitions. Nice.
And by limit, we're only getting this one message, right? This one phrase.
Yeah, and so I could actually set this to 100, and because the oldest and latest are the exact same timestamp, it won't matter. But it's always nice to just be more explicit about what you want here.
Yeah.
And if you set inclusive to false, you would actually get no messages because it won't include what's on either end, the oldest and newest. So it's set inclusive to true. And yeah, we should be able to get that result there. So if we drop down, the first thing maybe that we want to do, let's see here. Let's just grab that message out of the content. And so if we go back to our documentation, let's take a look again at the payload that we're going to get. I think it was a little bit down here. There it is. So we're expecting to get a payload from messages and should have, probably just one message in here. So that message is going to have the user who sent the message, and that's going to have the text. And there could be other types. You can imagine if somebody uploaded a file, for example, you could add a reaction to a video or a file uploaded or a screenshot. So type could be a lot of different things, but we're going to assume it's always a message for us. If we just jump back here, we can just dereference this. Maybe I'll replace that. So we saw inside text. Let's get it as text to translate. Sorry, actually, yeah, that should do it. Because inside here, we'll just go and get 0. So we double check. We're going to grab this out. We're going to grab the text.
And then we're setting it to text to translate?
Yeah, we'll call it text to translate. I think that's probably going to be a nice approach. And then
is it result.messages or is it history result.messages?
Good catch. It's probably going to be history result. Thank you.
Mhm.
I think that should do it. And we may want to add just a check here saying if history result.messages
Mhm.
length is less than or equal to 0, just return because something went wrong.
Okay, yeah. That means no
Um,
response is recorded. Okay.
yeah, like for some reason it didn't return any. So maybe the user deleted the message
Mm.
that we're trying to get, something along those lines. So this kind of covers our basis in case something goes bad. Yeah, and so we could just console log our history result here, just so we see it, and then underneath, let's double check that our text translate was pulled out properly as well.
Yeah.
And I think that should get us our message. Double check our server's still humming along. It is.
Did we set it to post the right message, or did we not do that yet?
So for now, I was
Okay. Okay.
thinking we
Yeah.
would just console log it out.
Oh.
Feel
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
feel pretty confident that we're getting the right information.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, let's totally start to change that
Mhm.
message up. I think that would be good. So we just jump back. We're going to remove our two emojis again. And let's add our Japanese flag. So not too much different should happen here.
Mhm.
But if we go back and bring up our terminal, we can see
Oh,
text to
cool.
translate.
Yeah.
It's got the message, and it's even added the emoji, which it uses the Slack syntax for the emoji, which is the colons on each side
Mhm.
and then the name. And then, yeah, if we look up here, we got the history result. And so you can see our oldest and latest timestamps are the same. And then
Mhm.
it just returned the one message. And, here's one thing that's interesting. Anytime you're working with an API, it's super hard to keep the documentation up to date with the API. And so there's a ton of stuff returned here. And if we go back to Slack's documentation for this, it has 4 elements. So sometimes it's nice just to, use our trusty console log, see what other good bits of information we get inside of here. Sometimes you might find they're really useful for whatever you're building out. In our case, we really just care about that text message. But speaking of the timestamps, here's the timestamp of the actual same message that we got inside of there. But you can also see if there's a thread going on, you might be able to get the timestamp of the latest reply inside there. So this particular timestamp, the one that ends in 1700, if we jump back to Slack, it's most likely this very last message. Or sorry, probably in this case, it was the one before it. But all these things are really useful as you're building out an app. You can reduce the number of calls that you're making to your APIs and just playing around with all that information. So, we've got our message there. I'm gonna stop our server and just commit again. Got the text to translate and let the server back up.
So lastly, we have to actually, I guess, format the message we want to send out, right?
Yeah. So in this case, I think we should create another function so that we can do the translation of the text. In our case, we're not going to call the Google API, but for the students, they will. And there's a good chance you would like a little function to be able to write that in so that you have a little bit more breathing room to write code and not make things too illegible. So yeah, I think we kind of want to have a new variable, which is the translated text most likely. And let's just kind of set that to an empty string. I think the idea that we want is we want to pass in the text to translate into a function where we can say, translate this text using this language code information that we
Mm.
fetched earlier. And it'll spit out the translated text, which we could then drop into the message over here. I think that's kind of where we want to go. And so we know with all these APIs, like the Google Translate API, it's going to be an asynchronous call. So let's write an asynchronous function right now, just to make it a little bit easier for everyone. And maybe we'll just call the function translate. And in this case, we're going to pass in the text to translate and the language information. And so we can just jump down to the bottom of the file, and we're going to write an async function in this case to translate text. I guess we'll call it translate actually. Text translate there, and language would be the other variable that we're taking in. And so the idea is that we're going to use the Google Translate API to translate text. And this is text translate, and this is the language. We really just care about language.code. It's probably the main thing. We use string, an object. It's going to return string.
And you're doing this to kind of explain your function, right?
Yeah, and so you don't have to document your functions like this.
Yeah.
This is a pretty common syntax, JS doc, or it's some flavor of the JS doc syntax.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ever want to auto-generate documentation, this kind of syntax would allow you to build a little website from it. But for me talking to you, it's a lot easier for me to, I think it's a lot easier for me to kind of document this function, and everybody can kind of see it and follow along a little bit easier than having me just say something that's half heard and then forgotten perhaps. Yeah, so if we, inside of here, this is really where you'd be calling like your translate. You'd probably do something like new translate, and like call some crazy function. For us, let's just return something nice. So let's do some sparkles and just say, imagine this is in, and then language.name. So imagine this is in Japanese, or imagine this is in Spanish, something like that. And that's going to be our translation. So again, it's kind of like an exercise for the students, is to take this one function, one line of code, and really make it magical with the Google Translate. But I think that should kind of get us in a good spot. So if we jump back up to where we called this function, just down here, we do an await.
Okay.
I think await should be, it's kind of like complaining that I've done something
Used
wrong.
await.
But I don't see.
Is the function asynchronous down below?
Yeah, it is an async function. So I'm not quite sure why the text editor doesn't like it, but let's try running it. If somebody is watching along and is about to be like, I know totally what's wrong, you can tell us. That'd be rad. So we have this text to translate. So we don't need to bother console logging that. We could probably just throw that
into our text.
Right into this text. And so to refresh my memory, what was like the goal of what we had here? We kind of had translation for, and then we had
the emoji. Yeah.
So if we do something like translation for, and reaction in there. So we're going to wrap that reaction in these colons, which tell Slack to make it all pretty. Create a new line, and then we're just going to throw in the translated text. I think that should be okay. And then using Markdown, let's do the underscore to make the top part italics. And that should make things look pretty. So let's make sure our server is still running. I'm a little sketched out by that warning that we're seeing, but let's just see what happens here. So I'll remove the Japanese flag, add it. So we got a reply here. So translation
Look at
for
that. Yeah.
and imagine this is in Japanese. And so likewise, we can add French here, and we could add Mexico for Spanish. And if we jump back to our code editor, we can kind of look through what we're seeing spit out at us. But yeah, we can see in this case flag dash MX was
Yeah.
used. And then if we go up a little bit, we can see France for some reason doesn't have flag. So, it's annoying that we have to strip out that flag dash, but our code seems to be running reliably, which is pretty rad. Like that's kind of the app. We can get rid of some of these console logs if we want, but
I have to say that was pretty successful.
yeah, so there's a lot of stuff you can build off from here as a student. I would say like trying to improve this language reaction function would be really, really nice. And we won't get into it here, but if you add a reaction to any of these sub messages, it won't work properly. And the reason is that our history function that we're using is only meant to get the history of the main messages. So it doesn't get the history of the threaded messages. So we can see kind of the funkiness that might go on here. But if I add the Japanese flag to this, nothing happened.
Okay, yeah, because we use the parent thread, right?
Yeah, it's only fetching the information here, so it's not able to actually find this message. And so you could make your app a little smarter by using another method here. If we just go back underneath the conversations.history, there's this conversation.replies, and
Oh, okay, yeah.
see it says retrieve a thread of messages posted to a conversation. So, if we wanted to use that, we won't get into it here, but what you would want to do is if this history result is 0, if you tried to find the message and you couldn't find it, then you'd probably want to try to fall back on that other function and see if you could look it up as a threaded response. That would be one way. And there's a couple more efficient ways to do it as well. So if students are really trying to build out a fully functional translation app that could maybe translate its own translated messages, really like kind of an inception experience there, you probably want to use those two methods together. But the basics are there. How's everyone in the chat doing?
I think that went. Oh, that was good. I'm gonna switch back to my screen. See if
Cool.
people have questions. Everything is good. Seems good. Awesome.
Sweet, Matt. Good to hear.
So, does anyone have any questions? Some final questions? Also, if you feel like the learning lab is a bit complicated, I spent a lot of time working with the translation API. So please message me on Discord and we can meet one on one. Um, or even come to office hours on Tuesday. Uh, Other than that, um, say thank you to Michael because that was a super good presentation on
Cool. Yeah, you're
threads and
welcome. I hope
reactions. Yeah,
hope some people gleaned some interesting things just from my own workflow, maybe. Yeah.
I definitely did. Yeah, that
Sweet.
was cool.
Cool.
Thank you for watching, Rebecca.
Yeah. Thanks for attending, everyone. Really appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Matt, thank you. Thank you guys for coming. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt.
Okay.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Yeah. I won't take any more of your time. Thank you for coming to the week 3 live stream, everyone.
Yep. See you guys. Bye.
Bye.